For more now, we are joined by Tony Fratto, founding partner at Hamilton Place Strategies and a former White House Deputy Press Secretary, also a CNBC contributor, and Brian Gardner, Managing Director of Washington Research at KBW, a Stifel company. So, Tony, the Republicans are kind of fighting with the president. Ultimately, they're going to have to come up with something, and they will. What do you think the Republicans want most? What's one or two on their stimulus wish list?
Well, look, number one on their list, and you could determine whether you include it in stimulus or not, is the liability protection that they want in this bill. That they want some limited protection for businesses, hospitals, schools, everybody who's going to open to not be burdened with with torts in the courts. So that's first on their list. They are looking for money. They want checks. Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, has been pretty clear on that, and they want to do something with unemployment insurance, change the bonus. They, $600 was generous. They're going to try to come up with some kind of model to cover a lot of the still really elevated unemployment in all the states.
Yeah, the idea being, Brian, that, businesses, they reopen, somebody gets sick, they can't sue them for $100 million because they said, well, you didn't provide it. Say, if we do that, if we don't have that, I think some people argue that we will never reopen in any kind of a scale. Brian, I assume you agree with that with Tony as far as the wish list. When do they begin negotiations with the Democrats, or kind of have they already behind the scenes?
I think there have been soft negotiations ongoing for several weeks, and they will intensify. They will pick up this week. The negotiations will last into next week. I don't think the market is prepared for the fact that the negotiations could go past the end of the month and into early August, probably the first week. And I wouldn't even rule out the second week of August. I think that's a long shot, but I should note it. So negotiations have been going on, and they're going to intensify.
And Brian, I'll stick with you. The $600 a week added incentive and unemployment benefits that was tacked on, according to some research that I've seen going around, 2/3 of the people who received it ended up taking home more money than they would have if they were working. And most of them, of course, spent that, which has kind of kept the economy going. That $600 extra benefit is now being hotly debated. Is it not, either as a back-to-work incentive, or whether it exists at all? What do you think ultimately happens with that payment?
Well, two things. One is I do think it gets converted into some kind of back-to-work bonus, back-to-work incentive. The second point I'd like to make is that that original supplemental check was hugely important for consumer finance stocks over the last couple of months, because credit card payments have hung in there. Forbearance has been probably a fraction of forbearance requests have been a fraction of what we expected. So that supplemental was impactful. But of course, there is then the flip side, that it is a disincentive for some people to go back to work. So I do think it will get converted into something else, probably a back to work bonus of some sort.
Tony, I'm old enough to remember the now seemingly microscopic stimulus plan of Barack Obama, and how everybody screamed, deficits, deficits, and it was $980 billion or whatever it is. I mean, that seems like a pimple now when you look at some of these numbers. Do deficits matter, and specifically to the GOP? I mean, they've been screaming about deficits forever, and suddenly not a peep.
It's a great question. I remember having these debates back then, and by the way, I argued at that time that stimulus plan was too small relative to the size of our economy. But people always wondered what the capacity was for funding markets to fund deficits, and it seems like we were pretty far off for what the capacity was out there to absorb treasuries, and probably could have done a lot more. So. Look, these are unheard of numbers. We're talking about the trillions of dollars. We're going to do more than $1 trillion here. The Senate is asking for $1 trillion. Nancy Pelosi and Democrats in the House are saying $3 trillion. So it's going to be another very big number. But the whole is very big. But this sort of theoretical capacity for the markets to absorb U.S. Treasuries, you wanted to be careful about exploring the limits. But it seems like there's a lot more absorptive capacity out there, and now Europe is doing the same
modern
thing.
monetary theory, Tony. I mean, I have debates virtually mostly on over the phone with people. I say,
Yeah.
is this going to change governing? I don't want to say forever, but for years to come. Suddenly money doesn't seem to matter. I'm not saying we shouldn't. People
No,
need
I
help.
agree.
This is an incredible, insane, scary time. But now it's like, oh, $1 trillion to pay off student loans? Why not? Medicare for all? Why not? I'm saying representatives are going to now have different historical frameworks with which to create arguments where it's going to be harder to counter.
I think you're absolutely right. Look, I mean, now the question is, are you going to use it for, today we're using it for consumption, you know, and the argument is, can we use it for investment? So, you know, would you use it on infrastructure? Would you use it on healthcare and education? Things that are going to have some long-term rate of return. That's where you want to, you want to do that kind of borrowing. You do not want to do this kind of borrowing on a regular basis for consumption. You know, that's not anything that I think either side is going to want to, you know, that's not a road they want to go down.